everyone to the How to Write a STEM Grant Application webinar. We put this webinar together for you to assist you as you're writing your STEM grant application, with the deadline being just a little over 2 weeks from now. We just thought it might be nice to run this webinar to assist you as you're thinking about submitting an application and actually writing your application. And we were also going to be recording this. I'm in the process of recording it, and the link to this webinar as well as the slide deck will be included on the STEM grant page on the TryEngineering.org website, so you can refer back to it there. At the end of the webinar today, we'll have time for you to ask questions. So please hold your questions until then, and we'll have some time, probably about 15 minutes or so, for you to ask your questions at that point. So let's get started. So our agenda for today is to give you a little bit of an overview of TryEngineering. We're going to go over the goals for today's session, the global impact that we've made through our STEM grant program. Then we're going to get into a little bit about the evaluation rubric that our judges will be using as they're scoring your application. And if you've looked at the application, you'll see that there are five separate areas of the application. Those are also going to correspond back to the evaluation rubric, and they are the program description, goals and objectives, milestones and schedule, budget, and evaluation and sustainability plan. We're going to talk a little bit about that deadline and then give time for Q&A, as I said. So TryEngineering, there's actually a link on this page to a little video. I was having some technical issues playing that video this morning, so I've included the link here so that you can watch it at a later date. It's a really great video, so if you get a chance to watch it, that would be nice for you to see that. But school-age children, so these are students that have not entered university yet, who pursue a career in engineering, develop the engineering habits of mind and special soft skills such as resilience to failure, critical thinking, and many more. So our TryEngineering website does include lesson plans for our educators as well as for you as volunteers as you're conducting your STEM outreach in your local communities. And so we want to have you understand that TryEngineering's resources are aimed at school-age children, not our university students. As a matter of fact, many of our volunteers doing STEM outreach are in fact university students themselves. So we want to clarify that that's what our TryEngineering resources are. So dedicated volunteers such as yourself are at the service of individuals and organizations who share the Pre-University Education Coordinating Committee, which is the committee that oversees the TryEngineering website, as well as the other TryEngineering programs that we have available. So providing support and collaboration opportunities. So one thing to keep in mind is we do have a mission and vision for TryEngineering. And you'll want to keep this mission and vision in mind as you're developing your programs and as you're writing your application, because we would like for the grants that we award to be aligned with our mission. So our mission is that TryEngineering fosters educational outreach to school-age children around the globe by supporting teachers and IEEE volunteers with the tools needed for engaging activities and measurable outcomes. TryEngineering provides resources, lesson plans, and activities that engage and inspire. And our vision is the IEEE in the world will look to PECC's leadership and insight in bringing youth to the global technical community. So STEM grants really should align with this mission. So really keep this in mind as you're writing your application and thinking about your program. Thank you, Stamatis. I think I'm going to move a window out of our way, because I think we're seeing a gray box there. Okay. So our goals for today is to help you to develop a STEM grant application that is effective and impactful. Remove any confusion around the grant constraints. and answer any questions you might have about the program. So let's talk a little bit about the global impact the program has made since its launch in 2021. So 144, we're very proud of this, programs have been funded, but we are even more proud of the amount of funds that have been awarded, and that's $176,000 funds that have been awarded since 2021. We've represented 43 countries, over 1,100 volunteers, over 600 parents, over 700 teachers, and over 20,000 school-aged students have been impacted by the grant programs that have received funding from this program. One thing to keep in mind is each year we have seen an increase in applications, and last year we had 462 applications and 53 programs funded. So it is a bit competitive in terms of the number of applications we receive and the funding that we have available to award the programs that the judges have selected. And so keep that in mind as you're doing your application. You want to put your best work forward. We would love to be able to award every single program a grant, but unfortunately we only have a certain amount of funding. And so we try to make it go as far as we can and award as many programs as we can. So we do have sponsors for this year, and a few of them, or most of them, are IEEE societies. So first of all, we have the IEEE Foundation, which is not a society, but it does offer us funding through our TryEngineering fund that we have with the foundation. But we also have the Communications Society, Signal Processing Society, Women in Engineering, the Computer Society, and the Oceanic Engineering Society. So if you have any programs that fall within these fields of interest, likely if you receive a grant from us, that funding will come from one of these societies. We're very happy to have them as our sponsors. And like I said, as you're submitting your application, think about whether the program is within one of these fields of interest so that you can be funded from one of the societies. So there are several types of outreach programs on the application. This will have a drop-down list that you can select some of these programs. And here's the list. I won't go through that now. But when you get into the application, you can select one of these types of programs that match the program that you're running in your local community. Now, in terms of funding levels, there are 3 levels of funding available, and you're going to indicate the level of funding that you would like to be awarded. So there's our Inspire level, which is our highest level of funding, which is $1,001 to $2,000 US. So we are going to grant a minimum of 5 of those funding levels in grants. Then we have our Share level, which is $501 to $1,000 US, and we're going to award a minimum of 10 grants for that category. And then our introductory level, this is more like kind of seed funding to get your program started. If you happen to be getting funding from other units within IEEE or outside companies, you may only need $500 in grant funding. So there's a minimum of 15 grants that will be awarded for that category. So the goal is to award grants to as many regions as possible in 2025. But one thing you need to keep in mind is that preference will be given to programs that impact a certain age of a school-age student, and that's ages 5 to 12. So if your program impacts students ages 5 to 12, you'll receive some additional points for that when your application is being reviewed. So I won't go into detail, but this is a slide, you'll have this slide deck available, as I mentioned. So we've got some spotlights on some of our grant programs that have been selected over the last few years. So here's one from Ecuador. We've got various programs here, a few of them that you can kind of read a little bit about these programs and learn about what type of program had received funding in the past. So you can also use the links here to take time to look at the 21, 22, 23, and 24 STEM grants that were awarded. And there's some stories and some articles and spotlights written about some of those programs. So you might want to take a look at those. So here's where we get into a lot of the detail that might help you when you're writing your application. So there is an evaluation rubric that our reviewers use as they're reviewing your application. So each application will be reviewed by 3 reviewers to be fair and not basically kind of spread those scores out amongst 3 judges to have more of an average of the score for your application. So as I mentioned previously, it'll be scored using the rubric in these following areas: the program description, goals and objectives, milestones and schedule, budget, and evaluation and sustainability plan. So for each of those criteria above, you may receive up to 4 points. So a 1 would be the least number of points and 4 would be the most number of points. But the total number that you could possibly receive for your application would be 20 points for those 5 items. But in addition, each application may receive up to 4 additional points. If you're a STEM champion, you'll receive a point, an extra point. If you target, as I mentioned previously, students ages 5 to 12, you'll receive an extra point. If you follow our TryEngineering social media pages like Facebook and LinkedIn, you'll receive an extra point. And if you subscribe to our TryEngineering newsletter, you'll receive an extra point for that as well. So certainly you're not going to be able to read this during this webinar, but this is what the evaluation rubric looks like. There is a current link on the STEM grant webpage on tryengineering.org that links you to this evaluation rubric, but also in this presentation, you'll see there's a link here that'll take you directly to the rubric. So it's going to give you a guideline, and this is what the reviewers will use as they're scoring your application, but a guideline to what a 4 would require, and then what a 3 would score, what it would score a 3, a 2, and a 1. So you can know up front, if you really want to see that score of a 4, you'll want to make sure that you're writing your application in a way that meets exceeds level of the evaluation rubric, and make sure your program fits within those requirements of what a 4 would be. So the first of those 5 criteria is program description. So when you get into the application, I think some of you may have already gone in, maybe looked at the application. I think there's over 300 people at this point who have at least accessed the application and maybe started filling it out and planned on going back later. But you'll see that there is an application question that asks you to briefly summarize the proposed program and provide any needed background and history about the program. And there is a word count of less than 500 words. And so again, here's the piece of the rubric for program description, and it tells you what applications would receive a 4 for this particular criteria, and then all the way down to a 1 for a maximum score of a 4. So we thought that it might be nice for you to see what application response to the program description has received a 4 in the past. So what you see in these boxes are actual responses, actual questionnaire answers to the program description question. And so again, I'm not going to go into great detail, but the things in blue here are very important. Those are things that our judges felt when they reviewed were information that fit within the rubric and that we were looking for as we were reviewing an application. So you want a clear statement of what the program is and what your mission is with the program, your goals for it. Just give us as much detail as you possibly can. If you have metrics to use, as you see, there's some percentages here. 1 in 5 students don't have internet access. That's like a really important metric to share with us, that your program is trying to improve that number. And so those are the types of things that we're going to look for, and the detail that we're going to look for in your answer that you're giving to this questionnaire, this question on the application. So here, I'm sorry, again, background based on verifiable data. Metrics is what I mentioned previously, and what some of the sources are for those metrics. So here's a couple more samples of what has received a score of a 4 in the past for the program description answer to the application question. And so the history of the program, a strong statement of the program intent, the outline of topics or learning objectives that you would like to target for the students within your program. So you want to think about those kinds of things when you're putting your answer together. Give us as much detail as you possibly can, and look back to this PowerPoint to get an idea of what has received a score of a 4 in the past and the type of information that our reviewers look for. So we also wanted to share with you what might have received a score of a 2. So not the lowest score, but kind of toward that lower end of the scoring. We would like to see more of a description and focus of the program. In this example, it's vague, with no detail about the specific hands-on activities or STEM competitions to be included. So although it's mentioned that there's going to be hands-on activities that are part of the program, it just says a variety of hands-on STEM activities. Really want to see exactly what hands-on activities that you're doing. And there's also mention of STEM competitions. Again, vague, does not give us detail on what those competitions are or the goal that you're trying to meet with those competitions and those hands-on activities. So the key to a strong program description is to identify who you are and include the program name, include background information, which, if you have sources, that's great. So this is basically the metrics and data that justify your goals for the program. State the program intent and summarize your expected outcomes. Be concise and end with a strong statement of purpose. So the next criteria on the rubric is our goals and objectives. So here's the application question. So basically you're stating your project goals and objectives, like how many participants there'll be, what will they be learning, will their mindsets or perceptions be changed, what partnerships might be formed. And you may not have answers to all these questions, but this is just to give you an idea of the types of things that we're looking for in the goals of the objectives criteria. Will your STEM community grow? Will underserved gain access to STEM? Those sorts of things is what we're looking for. But you want them to be SMART goals. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And again, there's a maximum word count of 500. When you're in the application, I think, basically it's going to tell you when you've hit that 500 mark, and you may have to scale back and be a little more concise with your application answer. So here's the piece of the rubric that talks about goals and objectives and what information would receive a 4 versus a 1 when the reviewers review your application. So again, here's a sample of a previous application response that received a score of a 4. So there were divided goals between external and internal audiences. There's well-defined goal statements that are measurable and include metrics. So I cannot stress enough how important it is for you to include metrics or data in your application. We really want to know, how many students are going to be reached, or parents, or teachers, how many volunteers might be trained because of your program. So you may have other volunteers that are sitting in on these sessions and they're getting trained. so that they can continue to run this program as well. So we want to see, those numbers of how many participants are being reached by your program. So this is an application response that scored a 2. And so basically the goals are included here. We talk about, what goals we have for the program, but there's no objectives. And the student learning outcomes are vague. So as you can see, it's just a pretty basic answer. It just kind of states some things that you're going to do with your program, but it's really lacking a lot of the detail that would be needed to score a 4. So the next criteria within the rubric is milestones and schedule. So the question talks about having you provide a project timeline with key milestones in your planning process, a proposed schedule for the event, and as many details as possible, including dates and times. Now, we understand that many of you would not be running your program right at the beginning of when you received the grant. And so you may not know exact calendar dates. And that's okay. You can give us kind of a rough idea of when you plan on running that program within 2025. And so that, just keep that in mind. Don't stress if you don't have specific calendar dates, but give us an idea of how many days it's going to take for your planning process and the different steps leading up to your event, how many days your event will be. Could just be one day. Most of them are. Could be one afternoon. It could be a couple of days. So just give us an idea of how long your program will run for. Your program must conclude by November 2025 because you'll need to submit a final report to us on December 1st, 2025. So keep that in mind as you're doing this schedule, so that you're completing your program by the November timeframe. And here you see the piece of the rubric that talks about the scoring as it relates to milestones and schedule. So this is obviously a lot of detail, but you can see a sample of what scored a 4 in the past in terms of a response to the application. So it's very detailed. Now, in this case, they did have actual dates on the left-hand side, so they could give us dates and times that they were going to conduct certain pieces of it. But then on the right, they just say day 1, day 2, day 3, that sort of thing. But we also would like to see not only the agenda and the event of that day or days, but we also kind of want to see that upfront planning and how long it's going to take you to start the planning, get the venue, set the date, all that sort of thing, and the different steps that you go through as you're planning your event. And then also post-event, when you're getting into the feedback. Give us an idea of when you plan on doing that as well. So not only do we want to see the agenda or for your actual program, we want to see the steps that led up to being able to conduct your program. So these are some of the things that we have: tasks, milestones, activities, realistic schedule based on your resources. So here's one that is a score of a 2. So a timeline's provided, certainly, as you see registration starts and ends and training starts and training ends, but it really doesn't talk about objectives and the actual activities that are going to take place within your event. So again, that event agenda would be really important for you to share, even if you just have a rough idea of some of the things you want to do within that day or days, and how long you think each activity is going to take. If it's a hands-on activity, go ahead and mention that, mention what hands-on activity it is and how it's part of your agenda for that program. So the next criteria within the rubric is budget. We want to have an idea of how you plan on spending the grant funding that you receive for the program. So we want to see a breakdown of how the funds will be used. And we want to see detail regarding hands-on materials, If there's a cost for the venue, I think in many circumstances, you may be getting space at a university and there's no cost to that. Prizes, but we want to see those kept to a minimum. And any marketing that you have done for your event. It may be that you just post your event in vTools if it's an event for volunteers and there's no cost. But there could be cost if you're marketing this to educators and direct to students. So one thing to keep in mind, up to 25% of the budget may be used for refreshments for participants. You want to stay within that guideline. As our reviewers are looking at the applications, they're kind of calculating how much of that budget is going toward refreshments. And we really would like to see it to be less than 25%. And so here is the piece of the rubric for budget. So you can see the scores between a 4 and a 1. So this is something that's really important to keep in mind. If you look on our grants page on TryEngineering.org, you'll see a bulleted list of items that are not eligible for grant funding. And so when you're submitting your application and including a budget, you do not want to include these items, because if you do, we likely cannot award you a grant. So it's important for you to keep that in mind as you're putting your budget together and submitting that in your application, because it may be the difference between your program receiving a grant or not. So we'll support transportation for students, like a bus or a van, to maybe a company tour is part of your event. Maybe it's in a rural community and they need to be able to get to the venue. So we want that to be supported through the grant, but not volunteer travel. So if you have a volunteer speaker coming in to help you conduct the event, we are not going to cover airfare, Uber, taxi, any of that as a way for them to get to the event. As I said, food and beverages should be up to 25% of the grant funds. So keep that in mind when you're submitting the application. And no monetary honorariums or scholarships should go to individuals. So if you have speakers for your events, they should be volunteer speakers. They should not be given a monetary honorarium for the time that they're spending at the event. So keep that in mind as you're inviting speakers. Make it clear to them that this is on a volunteer basis and that we're unable to pay them for their time. So here again are some samples of budgets that have been submitted in the past that have received a score of 4. So the budget is clear. Each expenditure is itemized. It's recommended to include the cost per person in many cases. And ideally the number of participants. So if they're working in teams, like teams of 2 is fairly common, that should be clear. So we understand the budget breakdown. So you can see in cases on here, we've got some microcontrollers and some robot kits and Raspberry Pi. So these are the materials that are associated with the hands-on activity. And although there may be marketing costs and maybe venue costs, this particular person who submitted this application is keeping in mind the amount of the grant funding they're requesting, and they're just including budget for the materials because those are within the amount of funding that they're requesting. So you don't need to include every single item that you're going to have as part of your budget, but only the components that fall within the grant funding you've requested. So that's something to keep in mind. If you go over that amount, so let's say you're asking for $1,000 in funding and you've got $1,500 in expenses on your budget, you want to think about that, because if you're not telling us how you're getting that other $500 in funding, what we see is that perhaps you're not getting the full funding that you need, and you may not conduct that event. And we don't want to see that happen. So when we provide funding to programs, we want to see that program actually conducted. and see that final report at the end of the year. So only give us expenses for the amount of funding that you're requesting from the 3 funding levels. And if you're going to go over that amount and show us your full budget, let us know how you're getting those extra funds. So, it could be the student branch, your local section. There could be ways that you're getting that extra funding, but really think about sharing that information with us and be clear about how you're getting the funding to run your program. So here's an example of a budget that scored a 2. So the budget's provided, certainly the items are there, but there's no detail for what's included in research and development. So research and development is there for $1,500, quite a large amount of money. And we don't understand what it means by research and development. So if you have such a thing, and we don't commonly see this as an item on the budget, but if you have such a thing, you'll want to give us detail as to what that includes. So you'll see that there's prizes and incentives here for $1,000. That seems very, very high. And there's no detail on what that cost includes. And so what are those prizes and incentives? How many students would receive those? That sort of thing. We don't really want to see $1,000 of a $2,000 grant go to prizes. That's really not how the grant funding is intended. We would rather see that funding go to hands-on materials, the marketing, the venue, that sort of things. We don't want to see half of the budget go to prizes and incentives. So in this case, as I was saying previously, the budget for this particular application is more than the grant requested, with no information as to how you'll secure the remaining funds to conduct the event. So again, we would be concerned about whether or not you would conduct this event because you're not receiving all the funding that you need to be able to conduct the event. So the last piece of the criteria in the rubric is the evaluation and sustainability plan. And this is really, really important for you to have as part of your program and for you to share with us, because there really is no reason to conduct an event unless you're looking to provide us some data on the success of the event and also how you plan to sustain it going forward. Really, we don't want to see a program conducted for 1 year and then never conduct an event again. We want you to think about how you're going to continue this program in years 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And maybe that could be, that you're planning ahead with other volunteers to kind of run the program for you, that sort of thing. So we want you to assess the effectiveness of your program. How will you evaluate how you met your goals and objectives? How will you know how many participants learned new skills, gain new knowledge, or change their perceptions? How will you be doing participant and facilitator testing, survey, or debriefing? So there's different ways that you can measure the effectiveness of your program. It could be something as simple as a survey that your students or your teachers are completing at the very end of your program. And that's one of the best ways that you can get that data before they ever leave the room. And I know in today's world, we do a lot of things virtually, and there are opportunities to run a survey online following the event. You may not get the responses that you would get if you do that right after your program on pen and paper. Or maybe they have laptops available to them in your room. Make sure they go in. If you want to do a virtual survey, make sure that your participants go in and complete that survey before they leave the event. And that way they're not leaving and you're missing the opportunity to get their feedback. And then certainly, as I said, how are you going to sustain the program in future years? So here's the piece of the rubric that talks about evaluation and sustainability plan and what the scores would be for those. So here you can see a sample of an application answer, a response to an application that scored a 4. So it explains that participants will complete a final project to evaluate their skills development. The mindset will be evaluated by survey of students' interests. So they're collecting the information using a survey, but you could also, have a final project that the students complete, and you can measure the effectiveness of the program like that. Notice parent feedback is also collected. So in many cases, you might have a parent in the room and you want to think about collecting and considering measuring the progress of the students, the skills and the knowledge that the students have. So maybe after the event and the student participates in this, you could follow back up with the parent and see if the parent feels like the student has gained skills and knowledge and that they're seeing kind of a change in the thinking of that student. And then the overall success of the program. Metrics on growth of the program by an increase in student enrollment. Student engagement will be measured through regular attendance. So here's the answer to an application question that scored a 2. So how feedback will be collected is provided. They're going to do not only a post-workshop survey, but they're going to do a pre-one to gauge interest in engineering, but it's not clear on how the outcomes will be measured. And then here, there's also no plan for sustaining the program. It's very vague, not a lot of detail about how they're planning to sustain the program going forward. So when you're thinking about measuring the impact of your program, when you're thinking about this and thinking about the response you're going to provide on your application, that there's certainly program outputs. So there's just the basics, the number of participants, volunteers, students, teachers, parents, that sort of thing. Anybody, any group of people that are participating in the event will want to know how many are you impacting. But you also have to think about if students are gaining knowledge, attitudes, interest, behavior from your program. So it's thinking one step further, not just the numbers of those who are participating, but also if they're gaining new knowledge and attitudes and interest about engineering, and might think and consider entering engineering in a program at university, and going one step further, choosing a career in engineering. So how is it changing their attitudes toward engineering as a whole, and how is it increasing their knowledge? So when you're talking to us about how you're measuring the impact, don't just tell us how many volunteers or students or teachers have participated in your program, but tell us what kind of knowledge or attitudes they're going to have toward engineering once they complete your program. So we're getting toward the end here, but some final reminders. So before entering your information into the submissions tool, we suggest having all your information nearby. So a recommended approach is to write your responses in a Word or Google Doc before you enter into the online application tool, and then copy and paste that in. And then that way, you'll know that you've got this background information, and then you're copying it into the tool itself. And then you'll have a chance to review it and adjust it before you submit your application. As I mentioned previously, do not exceed the word limit. I believe the platform is going to cut you off once you hit that 500 mark, so you may need to summarize your statements and be a little more concise to fall within that word limit. Whenever possible, provide details. The more detail that you have, the better it is for our reviewers. They can only, decide on how strong your program is by the responses that you give in your application. So you want to give metrics and verifiable background and information and sources. And I can't stress to you enough, I've said it a few times, metrics are especially important. So you really want to try to tell us who you're impacting, how you're impacting them, and even some data on how your program is going to contribute to increasing metrics of known verifiable background information. Ensure your table is realistic and has a clear start and and key tasks and milestones. So think about that. Your budget must include an itemization of expenses. Keep in mind those items on the bulleted list that aren't considered, won't be included for the funding. So if you include those in your budget, you're likely not going to receive a grant. So think about that. And then your evaluation and sustainability plan must include details on what you're measuring. So again, metrics. It's just a really important thing for our reviewers to see the impact your program is making and how you'll obtain that data. So again, how will you know if you're being successful? You're not just running the event just to run the event. You want to really understand its success, what the participants have learned, and then get some feedback on how they enjoyed the program, that you could make changes to it going forward. And then most importantly, how are you going to sustain this going after the first year? We really want to see the funding help support perhaps the first year of the program. Maybe sometimes it's the second year of the program and you're still looking for some funding to keep it going. You can certainly do that. I mean, again, it does not have to be the first year of your program. It could be the second year of your program, or maybe even further out than that, where you're still looking for funding, you're still trying to build your program, you're trying to sustain your program going forward. So just as a reminder, it's a little over 2 weeks away, so you still have plenty of time, but I know the holidays for many of you are falling right in the middle of this deadline. And so the deadline is the 3rd of January, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So you will have up until 11:59 to submit your application. We don't suggest that you wait till the last minute. Certainly the platform works well, but we don't want you to get into a situation where you're having some technical issues right at that last minute if you're trying to submit at 11:55 that night. So we're, suggesting try to get those in well before that deadline time. And here's what the most important thing is. I think in many cases at IEEE, part of our culture, I think any of you that have been part of conferences where you submit papers and deadlines for other applications, we do tend to extend deadlines at IEEE pretty often, at least in my experience here. But please keep in mind, we will not be extending the deadline for this grant application. So you need to hit that 3rd January, 11:59 p.m. deadline, or the system the platform will stop and you will not be able to submit an application. So please keep in mind, we're not extending it. So don't have the expectations that we will. We just want to be very clear about that up front. As you can imagine, there's quite a bit of a time frame that's involved in reviewing these applications. And last year we received over 400. And so it takes time to try to figure out the assignments of these applications to our reviewers, and then to give the reviewers time to review the applications before they are announced. And they'll be announced in early March. So you would be looking to get a email from us letting you know that you received a grant, and then also it will be posted on our TryEngineering.org webpage. So you would look for those emails coming out in early March. So that brings us to our question and answer session. So I'm gonna kind of see, I think I saw a chat pop up that somebody was asking about the recording. Yes, a link to the recording you will find on our grant page, our TryEngineering STEM grant page on the TryEngineering.org website. Right now, there's a link to last year's webinar on there. I will be updating it today with a link to this recording so that you have that, updated recording. And there'll also be a link to this presentation as well, so that you have access to all the links in it. Make sure you watch the TryEngineering video at the very beginning of the presentation. Our chair of our pre-university coordinating committee, Stamatis Dragomanos, created that video. So we want to share that as much as we can. And you may want to even share that video when you're running your program. So it's a really nice thing to have in your slides for your program so that your participants understand what TryEngineering is. And it's kind of fun. There's, you know, some children that are participating in programs that are speaking and talking about what they have learned. So feel free to share that video. It's actually out on YouTube. So the link's going to take you to our TryEngineering YouTube site. So feel free to share as much as you would like. So if anybody has any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hello, madam. Hello, madam.
Hello.
Hello.
Do you have a question? Okay. Do you have a question?
Am I audible, madam?
I'm sorry, I did not understand.
Am I audible? Hello.
Yes.
Madam, actually, I submitted the STEM grant in 2023, but it was not selected. They told me to try for the next time. So I can repeat the same thing in the 2024, apply for it.
Yes, you can try to apply. You can submit another application for that same program. You're going to want to make sure you make some adjustments to the answers that you give to the application based on some of the instruction we gave you today. So make some improvements to it, and certainly you can submit for a grant for that same program again.
Okay, madam. Thank you.
So I think we
Hey,
go ahead.
yeah, hey, Miss Flynn. So I am a member. I am one of the executive members at IEEE Pulchok Student Branch here in Nepal Region 10. And we're trying to conduct a project-based learning camp. And you also mentioned that there will be extra points for following TryEngineering on socials and subscribing to TryEngineering newsletter. So should we be following TryEngineering through the account of our student branch, or should we be doing with our personal accounts? I really didn't understand that part.
Probably through your personal account, but it certainly is not a problem if it's also through your your chapter account or something like that. But I know a lot of folks don't have personal accounts in social media in many cases. So certainly we want to make sure that your local chapter or your section is connected somehow so that the volunteers within your chapter are learning about TryEngineering's programs and resources that we provide. So certainly we look to you to follow all that through your personal account. But we understand that sometimes you don't have a personal account.
Sure. Thank you so much.
And basically in the application, we're not verifying that, to be honest with you. Obviously, it would be very difficult for us to verify that you're following us on our social media platform, but you are self-identifying that you in fact are following us in social media. So, you know, it's a self-reported response to that question.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, Michelle, I think you have a question. Michelle, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a question. I see that you are talking about the the deadline to finish the project, but is there a deadline to start the project?
No, as long as you start it after you know that you've received the grant, there's no start date that we require. So you can start it, you could get the funding on March 3rd and run your program the week after that. Okay. You can start it as close to when you're awarded those funds as possible, you know, as you need to.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. As far?
Thank you for the great presentation. So I volunteer for Region 7 Canada, and I was wondering if we can apply for multiple student branches. For example, we are planning to have some cyber safety training, which we will run through different student branches. Is it possible we make a grant on behalf of a section of the region where we mention about different student branches, and we see that we will copy the same program for different branches, or should we focus on only one student branch? Thank you.
We do have cases where more than one student branch, I think that's what you're asking, if more than one student branch is running a program.
Yeah.
Okay, yes,
Yeah.
you can include more than one student branch. We encourage our branches and our sections to collaborate and work together on programs. That's actually a good thing. So yes, you can certainly submit for a grant reflecting more than one student branch.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Muna, I think you have a question.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. So I want to ask if the grant will take care or it will cover the special needs students, like dyslexic. Do you focus on that? Okay.
Absolutely.
Within that, yeah, within the age gap or the age limit or age years for the students.
Yes, yes, we encourage, any programs that meet a special needs student, those are especially valuable. And then also underserved, programs that reach our underserved. And so, yes, we would certainly appreciate a program that reaches students with special needs.
And it's okay if it is like of two countries, so we have joint program doing the same progress, but same activities, just like here, for example, in US, in my country and US.
Yes, as long as you indicate on your program the countries that are working together. Again, we encourage collaboration, and wow, you're doing it over two countries, not two student branches. So
Yeah.
that's pretty great collaboration that we're seeing. So just be clear in the submission that you make that you are covering more than one country and you're collaborating with volunteers in both those countries. So that would be, good information to include on your application.
And one more question, please. So if we are trying to do this program over for dyslexic students or any special needs students, but over or across multiple institutions within the same country, will that be good as well, or it should be within one institution?
No, absolutely. We encourage multiple institutions. That's really a valuable thing. Again, if it's one, that's fine. But if you're covering more than one institution, that you've got those connections across several, that we encourage that. That means your program is having reach much further out than one that reaches one institution. And as you can imagine, it will be reaching many more students, many more educators, because you're across all those institutions.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Abel?
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. My question is, can a proposal scale on existing projects be accepted? That's if you write a proposal that tries to improve on the existing project that are already successfully implemented, can such proposal be considered?
Yeah. So if you have a program that you perhaps conducted last year and you want to make some improvements on that program to continue running it into future years, you could look to get some funding to continue that program. So yeah, you could certainly submit an application. Just be clear, that you're in your second year of the program. These are the types of inclusives these are the types of improvements that you're trying to make on that program. And so just be clear, the more detail that you provide, the better it is for our reviewers, so that they understand that you're trying to continue this program and make improvements to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think I missed Prashansa. Are you there?
Oh yeah, I forgot to unraise my hand. I've already
Oh, okay.
got my question.
I thought maybe I talked to you already.
Exactly right.
All right. So do we have any more questions? I think Stamatis is catching people on the chat for me. Thank you, Stamatis. I appreciate your help with that. So again, I did record this. I recorded the question and answer piece of it as well, because I thought that would be valuable for anybody that's trying to watch it on record. I think in many parts of the world, this is in the middle of the night. So we wanted to make sure that it was available as a resource for anybody who's considering submitting an application. So I think somebody just asked a question about what's the next step for reviewers. So it made me think of something. So we did have a call for reviewers that had a deadline of November 15th. If you have submitted your name to be considered to be a reviewer, you cannot also submit an application for a grant. So you cannot serve as a reviewer if you've submitted an application. So that's just kind of a basic rule that we have. So if you have submitted or plan on submitting an application for a grant, just email me at l.bolby@ieee.org and let me know that you need to, what we refer the term as, recuse yourself from being a reviewer. And that would be only for the 2025 year. If next year you want to serve as a reviewer and you're not submitting an application for a STEM grant, you can be a reviewer. So it's not forever. It's just because certainly there would be conflicts with you serving as a reviewer and also submitting for a grant application. So thank you for bringing that up. It was an important thing for me to mention and I had forgotten about it. So, so keep that in mind. Thank you, Donna. For those who are serving as reviewers and who aren't submitting an application for a grant, we'll be giving the assignments out on January 10th. So after the deadline of the 3rd, they'll give us a little bit of time to make the assignments, and then you'll get an email with your assignments on the 10th. So thank you for all that you do to inspire our next generations of engineers. And we hope you will consider applying for a TryEngineering STEM grant. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon, evening. Take care.